So welcome everybody to our book club on next steps in literacy instruction. And this is the book. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, please do. But you can join us. You can definitely follow along, even if you haven't had a chance to read the book. We are going to get into chapter 1 today. Lots of good stuff. But before we start, we're going to take a moment to do our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that ONLit's work takes place on the traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. So welcome to our first session together. And I'm Jordan Sloan, and I'm going to be here with you for the next few weeks, hosting this in English as well as in French. So you can join me for one or the other. And I'm one of the team members for ONlit. And we are actually all here together in London right now, doing some great planning to get everything ready for the fall. So lots of exciting things to come. As well as this book club and lots of professional learning coming up this year. So as we get into what this book club is going to look like, we're doing a little bit of a different structure this time around. So we are going to spend our first 4 chapters on Wednesday mornings together. And so from 9 to 10 for the next Wednesday morning, go through the first 4 chapters, the introduction, using next steps to teach struggling readers. We're going to go through some phonemic awareness and some phonics. After that, once school starts, because we will no longer be available on Wednesday mornings, we're going to shift to every second Wednesday evening from 7:30 to 8:30. And that's where we're going to go through those last 4 chapters. And that'll take us right through to October 23rd. So lots of time together. And we're going to jump in right away today with our morning structure. So we are going to do a little welcome and a little chapter 1 review all together. We're going to head out into some discussion groups. Today is just going to be a straight up discussion. There's going to be a lot of information coming at you from me today. As we move into the next couple of chapters, the discussion groups are going to shift from just questions to actually tasks that you're going to go through using the activities in the Next Steps book. So it's going to be some really hands-on stuff for you to do. And then we'll come back just for a bit of a quick closing. We do have a prize. Oh, not sure why that didn't update, but it should have updated to show you the explicit instruction book. So today's prize is the explicit instruction book. And if you stay until the very end, MJ will draw for our prize of the day, and we will send that right on over to you. All right, so next steps in literacy instruction. Let's get right into it. So why this book? Why did we choose this book? We chose this book really because it is so straightforward. It is so usable. It is so relevant to what we're doing. And as we start to work through the new language curriculum, it's our 2nd year through it. The changes that have come, especially with that strand B, we're really looking to find ways to reach all of our students and really help them to develop those skills to become proficient readers. Part of the new curriculum and the move to structured literacy and PPM 168 involves us having a better understanding of our students and the skills and knowledge that they have developed, as well as their next steps. And finding all of this out about our students really does begin with screening. And we're going to talk a lot about that. And the Ontario Human Rights Commission Right to Read report recommends that we screen all of our students at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the year. Screening is going to be implemented this fall throughout Ontario in SK through grade 2. And this book links directly to those screeners that have been approved for use in Ontario. So as we talk again about why this book at this time, simply having those assessments in place is not going to impact our teaching, and it's not going to impact student learning, because if no one has the time or the expertise available to take that raw assessment data and turn it into useful information, it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to impact our students. This book is going to give us those clear, actionable, precise next steps to work with all of our students based on the data that we've collected. So as we move into the preface of the book, Jan Hasbrook, who's given us so many gifts herself, calls this book a gift, and she's so right. And I know that once you get into this book, you're going to agree that especially in Ontario right now, we are really at an incredibly exciting and definitely overwhelming but we're in a time of shift and of momentum. And the shift is not a move back to basics, but it's a move forward with evidence. Jan Hasbrook calls the authors two master teachers, and she says that they embody these essential characteristics. They care deeply about students. They are committed to using the best evidence-based practices, and they are curious and reflective. And I think that's why we're all here, right? That's why you're here this morning, giving up your own time on your summer break so that we can learn together, so that we can chat. I believe that we're here because we share these characteristics. We care about our students. We are committed to best practices, and we are curious and we are reflective. So let's try to keep that in mind as we dig into this first chapter, these overviews together in our discussion groups. And remember, be kind to yourself as you participate in this learning and in these discussions together. So our first key takeaways up here on the screen, and there is a lot to unpack in this first chapter. These first two chapters are going to be a lot of talking and discussing, and then we'll get into some practical things after. So of the many superhero traits that teachers have, being an informed and knowledgeable problem solver is the one trait that can surmount reading difficulties. As problem solvers, we know that the solutions to many of our students' struggles with learning to read are found in the data gathered through three kinds of assessments: screening, diagnostic, and progress monitoring. And we also know that true problem solving originates in our ability to pinpoint the needs and address those needs through evidence-based instruction. That idea that teachers as problem solvers really resonated with me here, and I can see this as one of the ideas that anchors my thinking as I move through the book. The authors set the stage around this idea of educators, not just teachers, educators in a variety of roles that support students as problem solvers. And so as teachers, as educators, we know that we are constantly making those on-the-spot decisions. We are problem solving well beyond our school day. And we know that we are assessing both formally and informally and trying to figure things out all day long on an ongoing basis. The second part of this quote reminds me that there is still a lot of confusion around the language of assessment, or that assessment terminology. So we're really going to take the time today to clear that up. I realize that it's really important that we all have that same understanding of what the terms mean, so that there is consistency and clarity in communication and in practice. This is also not how many of us have been used to referring to assessment. There has been a lot of change in the last year, but we're still learning and growing, especially with those terms such as screening and diagnostic, and moving away from PMing. I certainly never learned about universal reading screening until this last year and a bit, 2 years, and it took me time to distinguish between the terms screening and diagnostic, and I certainly did not progress monitor the way that I've come to understand it and implement it now, and I know I'm not alone with that. So let's take a closer look at those assessments. So this table here is going to summarize the key features of the three types of assessments. And if we start at the top, we're going to look at screening first. And screening is like a temperature check. It's noticing that a child has a fever. It doesn't tell us what the problem is, and it is not intended for diagnosis. And the data that we get from that screener simply gives us an indication of risk. It is there a red flag here? Do we need to learn more? In Ontario this fall, we are required to screen all of our SK to grade 2 students, and there are 3 ministry-approved screeners that are being implemented by boards throughout the province. The options in English are Acadience Reading, Ames Web, or Easy CBM. If you're in French or French immersion, it's Acadience Reading Français. And these screeners answers the question of who. So we do this to find out who is struggling, who is not learning to read at the expected rate. This does not tell us what the problem is. It just tells us that there is a problem and who might have one. And finding out this information is a positive thing. Screening allows us to move away from the wait and fail model, and it gives us this chance to catch the kids before they fall. It's like we're building fences at the top of the cliff rather than parking ambulances at the bottom. Screening is based on a public health model. It's prevention as first intervention, and we do this with students as early as kindergarten. We know that the longer that we wait, the gap widens. Early reading trajectories, they stay stable. If we don't intervene with enough intensity of instruction to maintain the momentum needed for these kiddos to catch up, the gap widens. And the more the gap widens, the more time and resources are needed to close it. So that early reading screening, that's really about determining risk so that we can intervene early and even prevent problems from developing or from worsening. So although screening is mandated in PPM 168 for SK to grade 2 students, and MJ is going to put that link in the chat for us all. So if you need to refer back to that PPM, you can do that. Screening is also beneficial for older students, especially right now, as we implement our new curriculum and as we implement this new way of teaching literacy, because we have so many students with those skill gaps in multiple areas in the upper grades. We know that the PPM requires screening before mid-November, and then additional screening is required for those that don't meet the benchmark. These screening tools, all three of them, are intended for use 3 times a year, at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end of the year, and they progress at each stage, at each of those 3 points. So keep in mind that if you are not completing all 3, because they are not all mandated by the ministry, you may be missing important information in the in-between about your students and about their learning. It is best practice to screen 3 times a year, and you will hear that referenced in our discussions. The ministry mandates K to 2 by mid-November, with the results being communicated in the first kindergarten communication of learning or the first provincial report card between January and February. The second ministry mandated screening is required for all students who didn't meet the benchmark the first time through. It is optional for students who did meet the benchmark. So this screening has to be completed by the middle of March to provide time for ongoing tiered intervention, and then communicated on the second kindergarten communication of learning or the second provincial report card that comes at the end of June. So that's screening. And I'm just going to take a look here. Will our school board administration tell us which screener? Yeah, so the screeners that have been approved are Acadian Reading K to 6, Easy CBM, and one called Ames Web. And in French, it's Acadians Reading Français. And the decision as to which screener to use has been made by each school board. So your board will tell you which screener that you need to use, and they will be providing you with the training, the materials, the resources, everything that you need for that. I thought we were having a benchmark on the report card that goes past grade 2. The mandate from the ministry is the SK to grade 2 at this point, according to the PPM 168. So when we move from screening to diagnostic assessment happens as needed. It's not necessary to complete this with every student in the class, but it is necessary for any student flagged yellow or red on the screener. So those kiddos that don't quite meet the benchmark. And it really allows you to dig deeper. It's not fast, right? Our screening is fast. It's about 1 minute per whatever it is that we're assessing. Diagnostic, we're going to take a little more time, and it's not necessarily standardized. And what it's going to do, it's going to help us to identify specific gaps to allow us to plan targeted instruction. It's going to answer that question of what we need to teach. And then once we get there, we are going to progress monitor. Our progress monitoring answers the question of, is this working? It's like a GPS. Are we going in the right direction? Will we hit our target in time? So we don't necessarily need to wait until the next diagnostic assessment or the next round of screening or until the middle of the year or the end of the year. With progress monitoring, we can get that data right away and we can adjust our instruction accordingly. So now that we've gone through sort of the key terms, let's take a look at our key takeaway number 2. And it says the outcomes-based model helps us problem solve with our sights continually set on the outcome, which is reading success for all. And we're going to talk a little bit about the outcomes-based model, which is my favorite part of this whole thing. And what it does is it does help us problem solve, and it helps us to continually come back to that reading success piece. Again, we come back to this idea of educators as problem solvers, but now the authors are coming into this outcomes-based model, which is, it's just that. It's a model, or it's a roadmap to follow that guides us toward the outcome that we want, which is reading proficiency. We're going to take a closer look at the outcomes-based model on the next slide. And like I said, it is my favorite part. And it was just such an aha moment for me. It was a super clear way to see how to use the information that I have about my students to make the change that's going to impact them and to know right away if that change is working. Before we go, let's take just a closer look at those last few words, success for all. We know that we can teach all but a very small percentage of children to read. And there's so many things that we don't have answers for, or problems that we don't have the power or knowledge to solve. And while there's still things we don't know, we do know enough about teaching kids to read. So the science is such that we know if we find that right kind of instruction, if we find out about why our kids are struggling and about how to intervene when they do, that teaching children to read is within our control. So here is the outcomes-based model. And next steps leads us to engage in meaningful and worthy discussion about assessment and instruction based on the outcomes-based model. This model provides us with 5 steps to guide teacher problem-solving capabilities, and it outlines an easily implemented assessment-driven approach to inform evidence-based reading instruction. So we're going to go through this one step at a time. It is in the book. It's something that you're going to want to come back to, especially as you implement screening. And this book is going to help us to deepen our knowledge and practice in each of these areas. We're then going to be better equipped to focus our attention on the individual needs of students, which is going to result in improved selection and implementation of instructional methods and resources in a timely manner. When we're able to identify that risk, skills that need extra instruction are addressed, and progress is monitored routinely. And from there, the chances of a positive reading outcome are greatly increased. So we start, number 1, right at the top, we start by identifying students at risk. And for this, we're using the screener. We're answering the question of who is at risk. Remember, we screen all of our students. Ideally, we would be screening 3 times each school year from senior kindergarten through to the end grade 2 and even beyond. The screener can also help us to determine individual needs. However, we may need more information about our students' needs than what is provided in that 1-minute snapshot that is provided in that screener, in which case we're going to look at a diagnostic assessment. This is going to help us answer the question of why. Why is this happening? And what reading skills do we need to teach? Diagnostic assessment is completed as needed and only with those students for whom we require more information. You may choose to do diagnostic assessments on all of your students, but you need to be doing it with those students that are showing up in the red and the yellow on those benchmarks to give you the information that you need about what reading skills we need to teach. Once we've determined which students are at risk and which skills to teach, we need to ask what we should do about it. So this is where we move to the next step, planning and implementing instruction. And it's important that as we plan instruction, we include a plan to monitor our students' progress to answer the question, is it working? Did I implement the plan? Did the students improve? And doing that regularly, monitoring that progress regularly, determines how well the plan is working. Progress monitoring should take place at minimum every other week, more often in cases with students for whom we are concerned, and sometimes even a couple of times a week for students who are high risk. From here, we've got our progress monitoring, and the results of that progress monitoring will indicate if we need to make a change or if we need to continue with the current plan. And we're going to talk about that a little bit longer as to knowing sort of the signs as to when we need to make a change. If students are not showing growth over 3 consecutive progress monitoring assessments, that's when we need to take a closer look at things that perhaps need to change. The final portion of the model is fluid. That bottom circle, you can see it kind of work its way around. Progress must be monitored regularly in order to ensure continued progress to improve student outcomes. Problem solving is ongoing. We always are looking to be checking in and checking for change. So we can summarize the model as this: when risk is identified through screening, skills that need extra instruction, which are determined via diagnostic, are addressed through evidence-based instruction. Progress is monitored routinely. Changes of positive reading outcomes for all are greatly increased. Okay, so we're going to move next. Oh, there's our universal screening, our diagnostic, and our progress monitoring. And yeah, the slide deck, everything is going to be available through ONlit at the end of this session. So you'll be able to get the slide deck, and the session's also going to be recorded. All right, moving into our 3rd key takeaway from this chapter, and that is the use of unrelated activities without a connection to goals for learning is no longer an acceptable method of intervention for young readers. We know all of this stuff about our readers now, about our learners. We need to use it. We want to be and need to be intentional and strategic with every choice we make regarding activities and materials. We know that for all of our students, but especially for our struggling readers, every minute counts. They need ample practice opportunities. They need corrective feedback in order to improve and to progress. This practice needs to be purposeful and intentional. It needs to be related to the skills that they've almost mastered so that they are not practicing repeated errors or engaging in work that's not directly related to a skill-based specific learning goal. I think this is a really timely reminder for us. So we're partway through the summer. We're starting to wrap our heads around things that are coming in the fall, what it might look like. We don't know our students. We don't know what they might require at this point, but we do know the skills that we're looking to develop in our grade. And we know our curriculum, and we know those important pieces that are outlined in Strand B. I know in the past I've created lots of centers that I thought were meaningful, and then I was frustrated by the lack of my students being on task, the lack of engagement, and now I know better. So it's not going to be perfect, but this is always a good reminder. And we're going to truck along. We're going to move into the MTSS model next. And next steps is the application of that multi-tiered system of support. It's consisting of 3 tiers of instructional support. The authors explain that MTSS is the framework, and next steps is the application, the very practical piece. And as we're going to see later, the acronym next steps is actually a breakdown of the lesson sequence. So let's take a closer look at the multi-tiered system of support model, the MTSS, and this triangle illustrates the tiers of instruction. And what they explain in the book is that tier 1, that big yellow part at the bottom, is our core instruction, and its primary purpose is prevention. It's catching our students before they fall. So our instruction at tier 1 could take place as whole group instruction. It could also take place as small group skills-based instruction. When we get into that next layer up, it's a little bit smaller, that tier 2, and that's strategic or targeted instruction with the purpose of secondary prevention in small, flexible, skills-based groups. Tier 2 is in addition. It's an added dose. So it's based on assessment data for students who need it. The educator here provides more intensive instruction and intervention in the classroom or not for small groups. Remember, this is in addition to tier 1. It's not instead of. So we're adding an extra layer. Tier 3 at the very top is intensive instruction with a purpose of catching up. This is, again, intended to be in addition, so an additional dose of intensity or intervention. It is not an instead of, and it can be done in the classroom in small groups of students. A student could be taken out of the classroom in small groups or alone. We know that in every school board and every school, in every context, things are a little bit different, and it works with different models. So you're going to do your best with the situation that you're in here. Page 9 of the book gives us a clear description of the key elements for each tier of instruction as you move up the triangle. So it will give you things like smaller group size, increased frequency, intensity, more frequent progress monitoring, those kind of things that you'll need to know. I also want to talk a little bit about the percentage on the left side of the triangle when we look at the book, which is often a misunderstanding. The expectation is that all students, that 100% of our students will reach the goal of being on track or reading at grade level. The general guideline is that approximately 80% of our students should achieve those reading benchmarks with tier 1, that is core class instruction only. So the graphic on page 7 highlights some percentages to be aware of, stating that all students reach grade level reading goals, but what it takes to get them there varies in intensity. So we're looking for 100% of students to get there. 80% will reach that goal through tier 1 only. But we know that some students, a smaller percentage, will need that additional dose of targeted instruction and or intervention to reach the goal, and that's about 15%. So 15% of our kiddos are going to reach their goal through tier 1 with the addition of some tier 2 work. And an even smaller percentage, about 5% of students, are going to need even more intensive support, maybe in a really small group or maybe even one-to-one, as well as that tier 1 instruction and maybe even some tier 2. The reality is that there are some classes in schools where this triangle seems inverted, right? It's almost creating a top-heavy situation where resources are diluted. There is more demand than there are resources. And if we have so much demand, if more than 20% of our students are needing tier 2 and tier 3 support, then what we have is a tier 1 problem. So in these cases, we need to focus on the primary prevention piece and on strengthening our core classroom instruction. We need to focus on systematic, explicit, and direct instruction in our classrooms. We need to ensure that our students are getting solid evidence-based instruction in Tier 1. And then we need to free up the additional support for those students requiring it at the Tier 2 and 3 levels. Going a little further is that, what's really exciting here is that even though there's so much work to be done, is that tiered instruction, that MTSS, is part of our new language curriculum document. It's under considerations for program planning in the context section, and it's referred to as proactive preventative model designed to provide timely support for all students in order to prevent literacy difficulties from developing. It reduces the likelihood that a student will struggle or develop language difficulties in the future. It facilitates earlier introduction of more intensive intervention for students with significant learning difficulties, regardless of whether or not they have an identified learning disability or other special education need. The tiered approach is really meant to be fluid and flexible. So you'll notice on this graphic, which we've updated, and you can find it on ONlit.org, that along the bottom, there's 4 pink bubbles here. And these were added as reminders that we're not just talking about tiered instruction, but also the different systems factors that allow tiered instruction and MTSS to be effective for all students. So it's not only instruction, but these additional factors also play a key role. And the first bubble we see, that first one, is that school-wide assessment system. And this is the ideal in terms of screening. In the book, they make the point that MTSS is a shared responsibility of all administration and reading teachers and coaches and special education teachers, all the educators working with the student. And the team needs to work together to analyze that assessment data, to plan, to progress monitor, and to make changes as needed based on a student's response to the instruction. That second pink bubble is data-based decision-making, which is vital. So important. We sometimes find a negative viewpoint here, but what if we reframe our thinking? What if we think about the data as the voice of the child? The data is so important in guiding instruction for all students and ensuring that those that require that strategic and additional support get what they need. From a larger perspective, the data helps us to determine where to focus our time and resources. And another point to highlight here is the importance of proper training in administering the screening that provides the data to ensure that it's done with fidelity. And that's really the only way that we can be sure that we can trust the data that we have to make the best decisions for our students. So we need to make sure that we're using these screening tools. We're trained to use them properly. We're using them with fidelity. We're sticking to everything. It's so scripted and so outlined for us that we need to read word for word what's in there. We need to stick to the timing really, really well so that we get the proper data to be able to look at those benchmarks and make those decisions for our students. Our third bubble here is collaborative problem solving, which again brings us to looking at that data across a class, a grade, team, a group. We're looking at the bigger picture to determine how to meet needs, because data is meaningless unless we use it. And this is a shared responsibility and a key to how we can use our often very limited resources more efficiently. And then finally, that last bubble on the end, professional learning. And this book club is a great example. ONLIT's working on some great stuff that's coming up throughout the month of August and into the fall. For the MTSS module or model to work, we know that we need ongoing teacher training, and that's really been reinforced with the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read report. So I'm going to pause again because that was a lot of information and come back to another term that you're going to hear throughout this chapter. And once you've heard it here, you're probably going to hear it come up all the time. And that is the term CBMs, or curriculum-based measures. And the data that we're discussing in this book is data derived from what are called CBMs. And some of the curriculum-based measurement tools that you probably have heard of, we mentioned a few of them earlier: Acadience, AIMWeb, and Easy CBM, as well as Dibble's 8. And these are formative assessments, and they are the 4 specific tools that are referenced in this book. CBMs have a long history of research and development to support their use. They are reliable predictors of students' future reading success, and they include not only universal screening measures, but also diagnostic and progress monitoring tools. These tools provide valid, reliable measures of skills directly related to what is being taught. So if we are teaching the 5 key components of reading in an evidence-based manner, it's going to link right back to these CBMs. And as we learn more and become more familiar with the content of the new curriculum in Ontario, we're going to see even more shift in this area. All right. So let's take a look here at progress monitoring. So we've got our assessment data, we've got our instruction on the go, and then we come back to how we're going to keep this going, because like when we looked at that outcomes-based model, we saw that bottom piece go round and round, and we said, we don't need to wait until the next diagnostic assessment or the next screening period to find out if our students are getting what they need. So we're going to come back to this progress monitoring here, because if progress monitoring is not showing that desired growth, we need to make a change. And we can do that right away. We might consider changing our instruction. We might consider changing the composition of our group, the material, the resources we're using, or the amount of instructional time. So if you are doing progress monitoring and your data shows that the instruction or the intervention is not working, you make that change right away. Progress monitoring is quick, it's easy, it's powerful, and we do not have to and should not wait for the next screening period to make a change. We know that for our students with gaps, time is not on their side. They need to progress at an even faster pace to catch up with their peers. In the book, if you look at figure 1.6, it's on page 16 and 17, it's going to give you a checklist of tweaks that you might consider. Things like you might want to change your instruction, whether that's your lesson components, your structure, your degree of explicitness, your practice activities, whatever that is there. You might consider changing the group composition, maybe who's in the group or the size of the group. You may look at changing the amount of time, whether you're increasing the length and minutes of your group, whether you're seeing those students more often, or whether the duration of the intervention is longer, the number of weeks or months that you're using. With regards to the materials, the resources, the programs, the authors do let us know that there is no one size fits all in terms of core programs. Anything that's out there is going to need additional supplementation to meet the needs of all students, especially with struggling readers. That said, there are some key guidelines based on research and best practices that you can take a look at. So instruction, group composition, materials, instructional time. So when we look at that figure on 1.6, it does show us these headings. And these
I wouldn't buy this
one. When we think about the intensity of instructional support, the checklist offers instructional variables that can be altered or modified when a student is not making progress in that tier 2 or tier 3 instruction, and whether we need to intensify. This checklist can also be used to look at our tier 1 instruction and make sure that we're following those evidence-based practices. So I encourage you to take a look at points that you may want to consider on page 16 for a little bit more. From here, what we're going to do is take a look at progress monitoring even more. So what this is going to look like when we're monitoring progress and intensifying instruction. And this is an example of what a progress monitoring graph could look like. There are 2 examples in the book on page 14. And what we're going to see here is the diagonal line. And what that represents here is the expected growth required for the student to reach the goal that's been set. The X's are representing a progress monitoring being administered. So these are quick 1-minute assessments. We can see that those first 4 points are below our aim line. As a result, we need to change our instruction, right? We talked about all the things that we might consider changing here. So that red line is going to indicate that we've made some kind of change. This is how we're going to track that. After the change was made, we can see that the trajectory starts to look a little bit different. We see that the student is responding to instruction. We can see that they're starting to show that growth. And the authors here tell us that we generally need to see 3 points above the aim line to be confident that the student's on track. And that's what we see here. That progress monitoring measures included as part of the CBMs that we discussed are sensitive to tiny changes in a timely manner. So we know right away whether we need to make the change. The authors do suggest progress monitoring every 2 weeks, but more frequently for our tier 3 students. And page 15 tells us that as a general guideline, when we do not see growth on a progress monitoring chart, change one thing at a time and monitor. So whether you're changing that group size, the instruction, the intensity, whatever it is, if you're seeing over 3 progress monitoring sessions that there is no growth, then you consider another change. So you're going to use the guidelines on that page to make decisions about intervention changes. Progress monitoring, Haley's got that question in the chat. You can use Acadience, if whatever your screening tool is, there's lots out there that you can use for progress monitoring, depending on what grade you're in. Just as an example, I know that Acadience has the screening tool itself, but then also has alternate forms of all of those tools to progress monitor each of the skills. All right. Our final takeaway of this chapter is about multilingual learners. And multilingual learners benefit from a structured literacy approach, including foundational skills, and they may require additional supports. Page 20 is going to give us some really great examples, and the authors point out, and we know from research, that these students are also going to benefit from a structured literacy approach, as do our students in additional language programs such as French immersion. There is an added layer of instruction required here because these students don't have the vocabulary in the target language, and that makes comprehension of oral language and decoded words challenging, right? They can read and decode the word, but then we also need them to know what that word means once they've decoded it. Although the statistics presented in the book are from an American context, we know that there are parallels to our students here in Ontario. We know that we have many multilingual learners in our classes. We also know that we have many French as an additional language learners, so this takeaway is really big here. Our students need this added layer of explicit instruction in the common everyday vocabulary. We have students that can decode, but they also need the comprehension of the words that they have decoded because it's not part of their vocabulary. And we are going to talk a lot about vocabulary, I believe, chapter 6 or 7 coming up. We'll get into that. All right. So now it's going to be time to do a little chatting. We're going to send you off into groups. Before we do, I just want to introduce some norms for our breakout rooms. And we're going to come back to these as we move into our breakout rooms all the time. We want you to contribute to the conversation by speaking up, by taking up space, but also remembering that others need space too. We want to be cognizant of different experiences. We want to consider what we can learn from engaging with different viewpoints. We want to engage critically with the content. So don't let your first thought be your only thought, and know that growing and learning means that you may shift your position, you may revisit your assumptions, and you may advance your thinking. So we are going to go into our discussion rooms, and MJ is going to set those up for us. And we're going to talk about 2 questions, and I'm going to send you off for just about 10 minutes. And then we're going to come back. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll address as many as I can when we come back. We'll go through our winner for the week of the explicit instruction book. And here are our discussion questions. So we're going to chat, do a little intro of who you are, where you're from, and then chat a little bit about what assessments you have access to in your role in the 3 categories of screening and diagnostic and progress monitoring. And do you have questions about conducting assessments in one or more of these categories? And we're also going to take a look at the list of criteria for evidence-based intervention programs on page 18 and chat a little bit about whether your current program has these elements and maybe what's missing or what we need to work on a little bit as we get ready for our kiddos this fall. So we are good to go. We're going to send you off, and I'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. And I think everybody's back. So I hope that you had a great chance to discuss. We are just going to move into the end of our session for today and talk to MJ about the winner of our prize. So we have the explicit instruction book that will be sent to 1 winner. And our winner today is... So you need to send us your info to, MJ's going to put the email address in the chat. And if you send us your info, we will get that shipped right out to you. What is the exact title of that book? It is Explicit Instruction, and it is Anita Archer's book. So it is a fantastic read, and there's lots of great stuff online if you do look up Anita Archer. Just in terms of that explicit instruction piece and like vocabulary routines, great stuff. So that does bring us to the end of this morning's session. We will be back next Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, and we are going to take a look at chapter 2, another chapter that's kind of going to get us through how to use the next steps, how to use those lessons to teach struggling readers. After we finish chapter 2, then we're going to get into the big 5 right away. We're going to get into some really hands-on stuff. I am going to stay online. If you do want to stick around and chat a little bit, we're going to stop the recording and I'll stick around to chat with anyone that wants to stay. And if not, have a great day and I'll see you next week.